Joining us now is Behnam Ben Taleblu. He is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam Ben, I know we spoke to you about 30 minutes ago or so, and I'm not quite sure if you heard our previous guest and what she had to say, but she did bring up a good point about why Iran matters and, you know, how this new leader coming in should make everybody weary across the world. What's your take on that?
You know, she's absolutely right, and it's a pleasure to be back with you so soon. In essence, I remember when Dr. Skinner was leading policy planning at a time of increasing U.S. sanctions pressure against the government of the Islamic Republic, and when the designation campaign against the supreme leader of Iran's office, as well as Raisi, was well underway in 2019. Everything that Dr. Skinner was talking about Iran's larger enmity with the U.S., its shadow war vis-a-vis the U.S., and its global strategy to integrate itself with America's competitors. So today, Iran is closer than ever, not just with regional adversaries of the U.S., but global adversaries of the U.S., like the Russians, with whom Iran is tightening political and military ties with, as well as the Chinese, whom the Iranians are tightening economic and political ties with as well. So all of this has implications, not necessarily today, because Iran, unfortunately, continues to get away with murder, quite literally in the Middle East today, really since October 7th, but also since 1979. But for the long-run great power competition prospects that the U.S. will have against its near-peer competitors in Moscow and in Beijing.
As far as the relationship between Raisi and the Supreme Leader, do you know anything about that? Was it a strong relationship?
It is indeed believed to have been a strong relationship. If you look closely, since at least 2005, since the election, or quote-unquote selection, I should say, of then President Ahmadinejad, Iran's former polyester-clad Holocaust denier-in-chief, as I like to say, the Supreme Leader of Iran has been orchestrating an ultra-hard right shift in the regime's politics. As you may remember, before that, there was the reform movement in Iran. That was something that was politically and militarily crushed by the state against the society. And the Supreme Leader has really taken the mask off, and since 2005 been contracting the political space, the room for maneuver, the acceptable boundaries of public space in that country, making it smaller and smaller and smaller, and moving it further and further and further to the authoritarian and Islamist right inside of that already limited political space in that country. And Raisi is the ultimate manifestation of that. He is someone that was selected again to become president in 2021 and is largely believed to have been on the short list to become Iran's most powerful person after the regime's current octogenarian supreme leader passes away. And as I mentioned before, with the passing of Raisi now, that short list as to who will become Iran's next most powerful person just got a lot shorter.
You know, and Kyron, she was also talking about the crisis in the Middle East and how it's now become more difficult. I want to hear your thoughts on the drone strike that happened not long ago on Israel, and really the timing of all of this, because, you know, the more we talk about this and the more information we get coming in and talking to the experts about this, I mean, this is something that the world should be concerned about.
That's right, because in general, hypothetically, pretend none of the tit-for-tat that we saw between Israel and Iran in the month of April last month, hypothetically pretend that didn't happen. Pretend October 7th and the Israel-Gaza war and the multi-front war by Iran's proxies against Israel in the region was not happening. The reason this matters, even pretend none of that was happening, is because the regime in Iran is so unpopular that it cannot afford exogenous or sudden surprise shocks to its system. That's why every president since 1982 has served 2 terms, because the government doesn't like to have these kind of sporadic or surprise elections. The fact that there will be one in about 50 days it means that the regime is going to have to find a way to tightly manage it, tightly control it, push its own political lead to the forefront again. The regime doesn't like, again, to have to continue is actually quite poor, I should say. It's continuing to stage manage and feign popular interest when it knows that its legitimacy is at an all-time low inside that country. And when you mentioned earlier in the lead that, of course, Raisi was, quote-unquote, elected, I should say, again, selected, with the lowest ever recorded presidential turnout in the history of the government of the Islamic Republic. That's the proof in the pudding. For so long, these guys used to point to their stage-managed, tightly scripted selection processes as a way to deflect pressure and feign legitimacy. Now they can't do that. And now they're about to have to bare their underbelly to the world as to how unpopular they are. Then when you add on the Gaza conflict and the April tit for tat, this is a regime that feels empowered in the region, and it's empowered because it's had an ultra-hardline political consolidation inside the country. So there's no dissenters in the corridors of power in the Islamic Republic. And that non-existent room for dissent just got a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter.
Right, and obviously all eyes are going to be on them in the coming weeks and months, even more so than before. But how do you think the Iranian people feel about this?
You know, one need of only today, within the past 12 to 14 hours, look only to social media to see multiple, not just memes, jokes, felicitations by the Iranian people calling for, indeed, the news of Raisi's passing to be confirmed. This is a regime that is deeply, deeply unpopular within the Iranian streets. And as you've seen within every different boom and bust cycle of protests from the streets against the state since 2017, the population has taken every opportunity, whether it was an economic crisis, political crisis, environmental crisis, social issue, foreign policy issue, to show how different it is from the ruling elite in Tehran, how much closer their views and values and interests are with the West, in particular with Americans, than the rest in the region, as well as in the rest of the governing body inside the Islamic Republic. So ultimately, Iranian people found Raisi to be deeply reprehensible, deeply anathema to who they are and the culture and civilization that they have. So it is not at all shocking that you've seen the regime begin to slowly deploy security forces. It's not at all shocking that you see so on social media people felicitating or celebrating. You've even seen some reports of fireworks in different parts of Tehran in anticipation of the news of Raisi's passing. So again, this is a sharp contrast between state and society, and the regime is trying to tamp down this contrast both on the street and on social media.
You know, what are the chances that the Iranian people get somebody, a leader, get somebody that is a leader that they want in office? I mean, because it doesn't seem like they get too much of what they want.
Unfortunately, it seems like they get not much at all of what they want. If you look at this, you know, there may have been an argument maybe 30 years ago that, you know, Iranians were going to settle for the least bad option, but that's not at all the case now. When you look at who's been governing this country for the past 20, 30 years, I can say now with full confidence that so long as there is an Islamic Republic, so long as Khamenei is at the helm, you will have a structure of power in that country, in Tehran, that is 180 degrees opposite the views, values, and interests of the Iranian people. And again, don't take it from me. Take it from the slogans heard in multiple rounds of protest slogans from 2017 to present that are not talking about reform. They're talking about wholesale change. And they're not playing this game that the regime used to play between principalists or reformers. Remember, in 2018, the Iranian people were chanting, reformist, principalist, the jig is up. In the same year, they chanted out of Iranian government buildings in front of official institutions saying, the enemy is here. They lie when they say the enemy is in America. So again, this is a population that has not been coward despite the regime's, again, repressive, brutal use of force against them, whether it was on the street or in cyberspace.
I think it was you I was speaking to earlier about this online. It was heavily, you know, seen by a lot of people that the population, they were talking about revolting if this came out that he was dead. I mean, what do you foresee happening with the population and with the people, the Iranian people, after all of this? I know it's hard to you know, think forward like that because, you know, we don't know what we don't know. But from your standpoint, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, indeed, we have, conversely, to take another phrase from Rumsfeld, I think we have known unknowns in this sense. There are things that we know that we don't know. There's a lot of this kind of enmity and animosity, again, between the street and the state brewing. And it's not just brewing beneath the surface, it's pouring out in the labor strikes that we see, in the protests that we've seen, in the slogans that we hear, in the social media activism that we see. So this is, again, a society that is ready to push past the authoritarian structures of government, but has thus far been unable to. So in my view, it's always been a matter of when, not if, there'll be yet another street protest.
You know, when I was talking to Kyron Skinner just before you, she said that the slowness of the Iranian government getting this information out, it wasn't necessarily the story. But do you think that that has something to do with this? Do you think that is a big part of this story and how they're trying to cover it up?
I think it's just part of an understanding of the play-by-play, you know, particularly for a government like this.
Yeah, understanding how that government works.
Exactly. And for a government like this, before they're going to go out and formally announce something that they know to essentially be true, which is that helicopter which crashed as the way that it did, would have led to basically the burning of the cabin, as you've even seen the rescue teams talking about online now. They wanted to get all their ducks in a row in terms of messaging and in terms of managing the transition to the next president in this 50-day period where the first vice president, Mohammad Mokhtar, would be taking over. So in essence, this really is more about how that authoritarian regime engages in statecraft. But it does also, in terms of trying to get the teams out there in time and allegedly seeking foreign help, or trying to get foreign help, or the limited capacity of some of their own rescue teams, also is worth noting here as well in terms of a competence issue.
And then my final question for you, you do know this area, that as far as the terrain where this chopper went down. Is this a likely scenario of this happening? I mean, is it as bad as what they're saying and the Iranian state media is reporting and showing us?
Well, it's not just the terrain. So the chopper is believed to have gone down in Iran's East Azerbaijan province. That's in the northwest of the country. That's just shy of the Caucasus mountain region. Iran itself is actually a plateau consisting of several different mountain chains. So the elevation is high, it is rocky, but the conditions on that day when the helicopter crashed essentially were believed to be highly, highly foggy. Even when you saw the rescue teams, the limited footage of the rescue teams beginning to move into position, as well as reports from the area, it was exceptionally foggy. So this could have been a pilot issue vis-a-vis the weather. Occam's razor approach, the simplest explanation could be the most likely. It really indeed was the weather in that geography.
Okay. Behnam Ben, thank you so much for your time, especially staying up and staying on with us this morning. We appreciate you and your expertise on this topic.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.